Um, I am going to speak about, I'm going to speak about this topic, what AI developers owe Global South citizens. The topic is mostly shaped for AI developers outside the Global South, because I thought that mostly that would be my audience. But like, I think the ideas could also be taken up by anyone who's developing AI tools that are used in the Global South. So it could apply to anyone. So my overarching claim is this, that AI developers building tools which are likely to be used in Global South countries have an ethical obligation to devote more attention. I guess more attention here, meaning also more resources, more attention, more resources, more investment, you could say something like that, to the auditability of their tools, of the tools that they're developing. That comes together with the next claim that they also have an ethical obligation to extensively test and evaluate the social impact of the tools in these countries. And finally, an ethical obligation to build capacity in those countries. So I want to start with some crucial terms. So the first term you'll see regularly used, and like I'll keep talking about, is AI tools. And when I say AI tools here, I mean any tool that uses an algorithm whose functions and models have come out of machine learning or deep learning. So I'm going to presume that most people here have an idea of what machine learning and deep learning is, but just roughly speaking, machine learning is the field of comp science where algorithms are evaluated and trained to capture connections in data that human beings cannot do on their own. And deep learning is just a facet of machine learning that uses a special kind of network, neural networks, which makes it even more powerful. Yeah. So AI developers here, I mean actors who design, train, and build AI tools. And then auditability, I mean here the ease by which one could evaluate, review, or compare the building blocks, the decision-making rationales, and the decisions themselves. Although I mostly focus mostly on building blocks and the decision-making rationales of AI tools against some desirable standard. So just the way you would typically think about auditing, or when you audit something, what are you looking for? That's basically what I mean here. And when I refer to the Global South, I mostly mean countries outside Europe and North America, mostly low income and often politically and culturally marginalized. My case studies are Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, India, and the Philippines. But I think for the most part, my claims about them will take some careful generalization. Yeah. Okay, so obviously my claim has an ethical element to it. So before you agree with me, it's probably wise that you know what kind of ethical framework I'm using to make my assessment, to make my claim, my eventual claims, my overarching claim. So one idea I'm borrowing from is Benjamin Idleson's idea in a book he wrote in 2015, where he talks about actions or inactions which fail to appropriately respond to an actor's standing as a person being wrong. So what makes an action or an inaction wrong, according to Idelson, is the fact that it fails to appropriately respond to an actor's standing as a person. And in this case, it's important to note that animus, the existence of animus is irrelevant in this assessment by Idelson. Whether or not animus exists is not a crucial factor. Moving another like element, ethical framework that I'm using is the idea that whenever there are interactions where there is a significant power imbalance between actors, then there is a moral obligation on the more powerful actor, the most powerful actor in that interaction, to take extra caution in their actions and inactions. So this idea is a foundation, if you think about it closely, for rules about, for example, professor-student relationships, legal rules such as the doctrine of unconscionability in contract law, or even very lately, the EU's supply chain due diligence law, right? The understanding there is that, look, the global South countries, yeah, it would be in a perfect world, we would say, yeah, you can regulate the human rights in whatever's going on in your territory, but we understand that because of the significant power imbalance and because they need investments, then there is some coercion that is hard for them to get around. So you have to place responsibility on the more powerful party as well. Yeah, and so eventually what I'm saying is that it's not ethically right to do as you please just because the weaker actor has the technical ability to impose constraints on what you offer. I think generally speaking, there's probably a consensus on this. Just because the person can technically impose constraints on what you offer doesn't mean you can do what you want. There's some ethical responsibility on your side as well. Okay, so now I'd like to turn to the use of AI tools in global South countries. What I'm trying to say here is that AI tools are already being used in global South countries. Sorry, AI tools that have been developed in global North countries and China, for the most part, are already being used in global South countries. And we can plausibly predict that this will continue to grow in the near future. So for example, credit rating tools are already being used in Kenya, India, Nigeria, the Philippines, the big players here, Tala and Branch International, which are obviously not like domestic companies in any of these well, they're not like homegrown in any of these countries. And then in the education sector, we have prediction tools being used, for example, in India, Microsoft Azure. Machine learning is being used to predict dropout rates for students in India. And then finally, surveillance tools is probably the most known one. Surveillance tools are also being used. For example, Huawei is probably the most infamous player here. Uganda, Zambia, etc. But as it turns out, there are actually companies from the global North selling these products to global South countries. For example, I listed one for you here, FinSpy, which is sold by a company in the UK called Gamma Network. Yeah, so these are some examples of tools being developed in the global North and being sold in the global South, the global North and China, and being sold in the global South. As I said, we can plausibly expect that this trend will continue growing. And I think this claim is based off the fact that first, this has been the history of global capitalism, that the market, wherever there is a market, the player will try and sell the products there. And so we could expect that. Two, there are endless areas where machine learning and deep learning algorithms can actually make a difference. So that many people would probably want that to happen. For example, criminal justice, where many global south countries have backlogs of cases. See, there machine learning and deep learning could make a difference, yeah. And then finally, in AI development, the global south is very far behind the global north and China, meaning that it's very unlikely. The reason I put this there is to show that it's unlikely that the most advanced products would come out of these global south countries, entities in these global south countries. So it's likely that those advanced products will come from the global north countries into the global south countries. Yeah. So anyway, the thing I'm trying to say here overall is that AI tools are being used, developed in the global north, are being used in the global south, and we can plausibly expect that this will happen as the future comes. So what are the risks of using AI tools? I guess this is also where there's a place where there's complete consensus. So the literature is already significant. There's been a lot of academic work on this. I picked Karen Young's list just because I think it's one of the best ones. So Karen Young talks about the risk of erroneous or inaccurate decisions, the risk of discrimination to certain people in a society, the risk of expanded inequality. So yeah, where algorithms actually do help people, but they help only a certain cadre of people in a society. Then there's the risk of data-driven hyper-nudging. This is that the algorithm basically makes you do some things and you don't know you're doing them because the algorithm has made you do them. And then finally, data surveillance, which is like surveillance of that data, privacy issues, yeah. So because of these risks, there is more or less a wide consensus that we have to find ways of auditing AI tools, right? And I think everybody would agree with that. So auditability. Probably I should start by now answering the question: what does it mean for AI tools to be auditable, right? And what I'm listing here is the opposite of that. So I think there's consensus that like for AI tools to be auditable, the base source code that has been used needs to be transparent. First, well recorded, like very carefully recorded throughout in the source code language, and then also transparent. Second, there should be detailed records about the hardware that's been used, how the models have been trained, and how the models are updating. And then finally, there needs to be adequate explanation of the machine learning or deep learning algorithms that are being used and how they're working, right? Well, this is not the case for the algorithms that are being used in the global south. So I examined like Atala and Branch International's algorithms, and this is not the case for them, certainly. But then I should probably say that this problem is not a problem unique to the global south. The problem of source code opacity, the problem of unavailable detailed records, the problem of inadequate explanation of ML or DL algorithms, it's not a problem unique to the global south. And this is probably what the EU's new law, in one way, the EU's new law is trying to address that problem by requiring that these kinds of things are made available to regulators whenever they seek them. The basis for this inauditability, it's not just that, I guess not that the companies want them to be inauditable all the time. So trade secrets, the problem of the source code is linked to the problem of trade secrets, is linked to the idea of trade secrets. That's IP rights, opening up our source code would be basically telling people how to build our tool. and that's what makes our tool special. Then there's a problem of the nature of modern deep learning algorithms. And I mean here, it's well known that modern deep learning algorithms, which use neural networks, are very complicated. Because the neural networks have many layers, and it's very difficult to figure out which input is being used to make the final decision, or like which are the important inputs there. So when we talk about explainability, the last point I've listed there, it's very difficult to achieve explainability when we come to modern deep learning algorithms. And then finally, there's that it has been argued that the possibility of some users gaming the system is also a reason why some of this information should remain closed. Basically, when you find out how it works, you go and start doing things in a way that can go around that. Okay, so what does successful auditing need? Successful auditing requires auditability. So this stuff I've just listed here. And it also requires capacity. So capacity and auditability. Without those two, I don't think you can do any successful auditing of algorithms, of AI tools. So I've already sort of discussed the auditability, the items in auditability. For capacity, you need obviously personnel with the understanding of how machine learning or deep learning algorithms work. But here there's something really important that I think makes the biggest difference between auditing AI tools and auditing any other product coming out of the global north into the global south, for example, pharmaceutical products, right? And this is this problem I've just listed the quote from Sarah Kassir here, that algorithmic auditing must be interdisciplinary in order for it to succeed. It should integrate professional skepticism with social science, methodology, and concepts from fields such as law, psychology, behavioral economics, human-centered design, and ethics. And really, the thing with algorithmic auditing, because of how many, what's the kind of variety of impacts it could possibly have, is it has to be such an interdisciplinary enterprise for it to actually be successful. This is a little different from like typical product auditing, where you could have one specialist and because it's very domain specific, you could be able to audit, right? Yeah, okay. So finally, the institutions designed to, the institutions that are in whichever society the algorithms are being run need to be designed to robustly audit. So here I mean public institutions like government agencies. I mean here also private institutions like news houses, and I also mean not-for-profit institutions such as NGOs. Yeah. In the UK, I would say a great example of not-for-profit institutions doing this kind of work is Foxglove, which has done awesome work on auditing algorithms. Okay, so well, as I've said, the problems of inauditability are not unique to the global south, but the problems of capacity are unique to the global south. So although the problems of inauditability are reflected everywhere, the problems of capacity are, well, I mean, you could also have a capacity problem in the global north, but it doesn't come close to the capacity problem in the global south. That's what I'm trying to say. So here I'm just taking some points from evidence, some points from research I've previously done on anti-discrimination auditing of algorithms in these countries. And these are the key points key takeaways I got. First of all, there are bigger problems generally. The society believes there are bigger problems. The state believes there are bigger problems, and economic disparation, meaning that the auditing of AI tools is not considered a priority. And I guess that's sort of understandable, right? There are many other problems where capacity is needed, where resources are needed. And so auditing of AI tools is not at all a priority. This, by the way, also, this economic desperation in particular, that point creates the vast power imbalance that exists. The vast power imbalance comes out of the economic desperation. The idea that whichever company wants to sell a product in the global south or like run its AI tool in the environment in the global south, the country will probably be very reluctant. The state will probably be very reluctant to say no, simply because they need economic output from wherever it can come from, right? So there's that power imbalance that exists. The other thing I'm taking away is that state institutions are not designed to enforce a culture of accountability. That has been the case for a very long time. I mean, since colonialism, many state institutions in Africa, at least, well, they're mostly designed to enforce, what the president of the time wants. And so this is a problem because you see, for example, even discrimination from human source, human discrimination cannot be policed, seriously policed, right? Anyway, and then there's the culture of interdisciplinarity that's really weak. And this is, as I said, interdisciplinarity is crucial to successful auditing, right? The thing is, in this global south countries, the culture of interdisciplinarity is fairly weak. This is a generalized claim, but like, I'm a little bit confident about the claim, although it's a very generalized claim as well. So even though like required fields are trained at higher education institutions, for example, you might find comp science being taught, etc., comp science, economics, psychology, etc., there is very little collaboration, and we find very few individuals with expertise in multiple areas, right? So it's the culture of interdisciplinarity itself is also weak, even in government. Yeah. And then although personnel training could be scaled up quickly, so in my opinion, personnel training is not a major problem. Like, I think at least in most of these countries, I mean, there are some where it is, but I think mostly it's not. It could be scaled up, but it will likely not be, like, the availability of top class training is a problem, and the resources to hire and deploy that personnel that is trained may not be available for public, for profit, or not for profit sectors. In all these sectors, it might not be available. So yeah, you could have a news house, but it doesn't have the resources to go hiring a journalist whose focus is on like comp science and algorithms to report stories from there, or purely tech. Just like one example. Okay. So what does this mean? Nearly done now. I think it means that AI developers building tools that will be used in global south countries can be fairly sure that it is unlikely that these countries have the wherewithal to robustly audit these tools. And so running out of that, my claim is that it would be morally wrongful for them to ignore this crucial fact as they commercialize their tools in global south countries. Again, just to emphasize, like, one could respond and say, look, why wouldn't you argue about the same thing for all the other tools that are exported into global south countries? But the contextual differences I've listed are why I'm saying it's like the failure is, the incapacity is deeper than in normal product exportation. That's what I'm trying to argue here. So anyway, there's a moral obligation on them, on AI developers, to take steps to make their tools more auditable, to rigorously test the tool's social impact before use in these global south countries, and possibly to help build capacity. And if they don't do so, then they will not be showing appropriate responsiveness Global South citizens standing as person. Now, this is going back to my ethical framework I set out in the beginning. So how exactly would the interventions I'm proposing here help? I think that developing tools that are easily auditable, again, easily auditable tools would mean where source code is available, is carefully recorded and available, where source code is carefully available. Yeah, the hardware that has been used is available. Explainability is important, like you build tools that could be explained properly, how they work. Yeah, so I think if you do that, you essentially reduce the need for expensive training and hiring of top-class specialists. So there are explainability, like there is the possibility of explainability. There's already a whole field, right, in AI that's building where people are working on explainability. But like, I think that it's going to be even more expensive to be training and hiring these kinds of specialists. So it would be a little easier if you could just build tools that are easily auditable, because then you might, the global South countries might not need to hire and expensive train and hire expensive top-class specialists, right? I think also easily auditable tools allow for global South countries to develop their own metrics of justice. So what I mean here is that one could argue that the developers, AI developers in global North countries are already keeping in mind auditability, and like they make adjustments to make their tools more auditable. But so I'm talking about auditability here in terms of very openly just being allowing it to be able to be reviewed, because then that would mean that the global South countries would be able to say, this is our standard, so let's review this against that standard. Yeah, easily auditable tools would allow for that. And then rigorous testing of the tools will reduce the likelihood of unfair social impacts. I mean, you can't entirely reduce the, like you can't completely delete the possibility, but I think rigorous testing would reduce it. And I mean, yeah. And then finally, helping to build capacity will increase the ability of the global South to audit AI tools. I guess I didn't like say, but like, this is something that already happens in certain sectors, but I've never really seen it seriously happen in the AI sector, where like developers feel the need to build the capacity of people to audit their tools. I think it's really going to be necessary in global South countries. Yeah, so that's that is where my talk ends, and thank you very much, and take questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cecil. That was really illuminating. So I think for questions, and if people want to raise hands, and we can go through and unmute, or if you feel more comfortable, you can put things in the chat and I can read them out. But yeah, please feel free to ask any questions. I can just kick off with one that I had, just back to the points you listed from Karen Young, listing the risks that we get from AI tools. This hyper nudging, I haven't sort of heard this term before, hyper nudging, and I just wondered if you had any examples of what that looks like. I'm assuming behavioral psychology and just a way that you kind of elicit certain behaviors, but what does it mean?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think what she means is exactly what you've said. Let me just get like proper proof of this before I say anything. Yeah, basically, yeah, exactly what you said. So it's like, oh, great. Yeah. It's like Cambridge Analytica kind of behaviors or news feed, Facebook news feed, basically like, yeah, making you do some things without actually knowing that you're being made to do some things. Yeah, I think that's what she means, basically. Happy to send you the chapter if you're interested. Yeah.
Thank you. Cool. Okay. And thank you, Matthias, as well. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Right, so Aislinn, yes, would you like to unmute and just ask away?
Yeah, hi, thanks Cecil for a great talk. It was fantastic. So just in terms of like practical approaches, do you think that it would be good if we develop more kind of global standards on auditing, just to have kind of a more practical way in which we can try and get like independent auditors to do a single audit that can be used by multiple countries in the global south? Or do you think that it's important that we have kind of national regimes to account for differences between different countries?
Thank you. Yeah, and just to say, like, Aislinn's paper was one of my big papers that really influenced my AI stuff. So anyway, it's a good question. So my feeling is that it would be great if we could have like in global standards. That would be really great. But I'm really skeptical, just because I guess because of the AI race, so to say, that makes me really skeptical that it's even possible. And then, of course, being someone from the global south, I think there is always the risk of the hegemony of the global south. So the standards that are set are standards that global north countries align with their values, but may not necessarily align with what global south countries' values are. So yeah, right now, to be fair, let me just say that I'm leaning towards national standards, which comes with a lot of complications also. I guess I've never thought carefully about this, but yeah, that's what I think. That's what I think. That I guess I could actually get past the hegemony thing. I think I could get past the hegemony thing. But I wonder if it's even possible to get China to agree to like common standards of auditing. What do you think? I'm actually curious.
No, I'm not sure. It's just because obviously the UN and the OECD have been doing stuff in this area, and for me personally, I'm always quite skeptical of like soft law mechanisms. Just having worked with like the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises, I found them to be like very, very weak, for example. But I wonder whether it could be something that's just like a bit of a stopgap mechanism, kind of like how the OECD guidelines do provide something to hold like multinationals to account, like in the absence of something stronger, it can maybe be a starting point. But I think I agree that like, I actually just think like national law that's binding is needed. And I guess like transnational things other than the EU stuff can't really do that. So yeah, but I don't know. But yeah, really interesting to hear your thoughts though.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think Ali had her hand up next.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for an amazing talk, Cecil. I just had one question. How urgent and necessary are domestic standards for AI development in global south countries?
Yeah, thanks. How urgent? The answer is probably just, how urgent? I think that if you ask me, it's urgent, but then I suppose the reality looks like it's not urgent because the tools being used are very few and far between. And yeah, but you know, by the way, those tools being used already, for example, Tala's tool, credit rating tool, branch credit rating tool, In Kenya, there's exams tools being used. Nobody actually knows what they're doing in the society, and that's a bad sign if you ask me. Nobody truly knows the impact they're having on society, and Talent Branch really fought regulation, the central bank regulation was supposed to come. So I don't know. If you ask me, Ali, I'd say it's urgent because already this is where we're going, and it's only going to like rapidly increase. Yeah, let me say it's urgent. But if you look at the reality, like how many tools are actually being used, you might conclude that it's not really urgent. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Samaya, if you're ready.
Yeah, I have a question that is probably to Taya. So when we talk about AI tools that are already easily auditable for global north countries, I wanted to know to what extent that will go. One, in cases whereby we want to have systems whereby we've borrowed the systems, but we want to make them contextually relevant in the countries that are buying these sources, for instance, Tala. So if we make them easily auditable, to what extent will they be easily auditable? And then my next question is, that is related to that, is if we have futuristic indications that global South countries are already developing this AI, are going to be, in fact, developing them and using them more regularly. How don't you think it's, or do you think it is going to be too short term to be able to be relying on already easily auditable AI tools that won't allow for enough growth in these countries that want to prosper? Yeah, thank you.
I didn't understand the first one. Do you mind just like saying it a little bit again? I didn't quite understand.
Okay, so the first one is when we talk about moral obligation in line with AI tools, and that AI developers in your context should be able to make tools that are easily auditable in global South countries. I was asking to what extent maybe should that be in order to allow for countries, for instance, now in Kenya, when they took the Tala system, there's a way in which there's a little gap in which nationals, like even in Kenya, can be able to tweak the system, I guess, to be able to incorporate or to make it contextually relevant for it to work in Kenya. So how will you balance the risks that come already with the fact that we don't have that kind of capacity in Kenya, and the fact that the AI developers in your context have that moral obligation to make it, yeah, I'm not sure. Is it clear?
Sort of. Okay. Okay. I guess for me, there is no conflict between making a tool auditable and building it further, or like making it better, more accurate, something like that. I don't think there's a conflict, because I mean, for me, auditability is simply the idea that how well we can evaluate it, how well we can know how it works, its building blocks, its history, what it's been trained on, etc. And then we can figure out how exactly it works. So I don't know. I don't see it as necessarily impeding further building of the tool. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? Yeah, Simon.
Okay, so my question is, I had a brief look at the UAI Act, and it explicitly prohibited high-risk AI systems. This includes surveillance systems. And of course, now these tools start being imported to global South countries. I just like to get to know your thoughts on whether what's the incentive for this global South countries, particularly the oppressive ones, to prohibit these systems, because I think it's my I think backed penny fact, but my assumption is that these tools will amplify already existing inequalities. I mean, for example, Kenya, we do know that surveillance undergoes, and of course, I'm assuming that if they get these tools and they'll use them for the wrong purposes. I'd like to know your thoughts on that. That's all.
Yeah, it's a worry for sure. It's a worry. The only incentive, in my opinion, is to look like you respect human rights, people's human rights, but that might not be the case for many of these governments. I don't know. I guess for me here, the solution, if we are to get a solution, is for non-state actors in these countries, particularly where it's going on, is for non-state actors to become really loud about it, and maybe the international community to apply more pressure. And by the way, again, I think it's really mind-blowing how something like the EU's due diligence law, the upcoming due diligence law, can have such great impacts downstream. So because just in case no one knows, people don't know, it's like the law says that, you know, you have human rights, your obligations for human rights obligations. So you have to evaluate your whole supply chain from wherever the product is being gotten all the way to the country. Something like that is so good, because I feel like it can force the people who create such products. Well, it's not the same law, but the same idea, to force the people who create such products to stop selling those kinds of products to countries which will obviously be happy to take them. So anyway, Simon, I'm saying that I think the only incentive seems to me to be like respectability, to look like for governments in these countries to look like they respect people's human rights. And I mean, I think the way forward is like for those who know to apply more pressure on these governments, and like the international community should also be more aggressive. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll just read out a question we have in the chat before we hear your question, Mark. But so we have Young Israel is here. He's just said, Cecil, does making AI tools auditable imply altering AI source codes to embed auditing lines of code? And how would one ensure that all functional aspects of the AI tools are audited due to the issue of trade secrets?
Yeah, thanks, Young. I should first say I'm not a comp scientist. I'm not a comp scientist, and like my knowledge of AI is pretty basic. I think actually it's pretty basic. Anyway, so I'll answer the one I kind of get, right? The trade secrets one, that's what I understand. So that is a challenge, right? That's a challenge. That's what they are. That's the other side of the argument, that we can't just let you audit our code, because if we open up our code, then we're giving away trade secrets. I don't know. I think that there's a way out of that. I mean, the way I see it is like, if this code is seen, I mean, it's risky. Okay, the EU Act actually does provide for this. So I wonder how they'll make it work. And maybe like Aislinn, you might know, but I've seen that it actually does provide for the fact that the code should be opened up when the government agencies request for it. okay, what I was going to say is like, maybe Aislinn, if you know like how the EU one is going to be implemented, you could help me out. But what I was going to say is, I think if the people who get access are a limited number of people, and obviously there's ideas on about confidentiality, that could make a difference. Of course, I can't say that it's impossible that one could get the code and like give it out to someone possibly, and then still back in the same problem. Yeah, so that's what I'd say as the way out. But by and large, like it's between a rock and a hard place, in my opinion, between a rock and a hard place, because I just don't think that we can continue with, we can just continue with the idea that it's okay for us not to know how what the code says. Like nobody can see what the code is saying. You know, I think that's a little bit untenable. And so we need a way out of that. And for now, I feel like the plausible way out is to open the code. Yeah, so.
Okay, thank you. Mark, if you want to go ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions. The first one is, I haven't read much on AI, but I think there's some contestations on the effects of AI. Some people might say like human labor will not be important, or espionage will be at the rage. And others might argue for healthcare development and all other advantages that come. So what is your take on the development of AI, or the benefits or the effects generally of AI, whether there are any ethical contestations towards those effects? And then my second question is based largely on assumptions, but I am assuming that Britain industrialized first before the entire world, and then Europe, then America, and so on. So China industrialized last, apart after the other global north countries. And since you mentioned that there's a problem on capacity, if China already has a high capacity, what will be your case for global south countries having a centralized economic system like China's to advance their capacity, or whether there's even any marginal difference between global south countries that have a centralized economic system like China's, or capitalistic systems in terms of their capacity? Like what will be your views on that? Yeah, thanks.
All right. I was just looking at the answer. Technical documentation, okay. So does this mean that they don't get to request for the code itself?
Yeah, it's not, I don't actually think that it has provision to look directly at the code. It's more this kind of documentation that the AI providers have to compile and like keep a record of throughout the life cycle of the AI. So it will have things like the design specifications, like what testing they've done, a lot of this kind of stuff. And it's all based on like product regulation. Like for example, if you're selling like a hairdryer or something, you have to like keep documentation about how you've made sure it's safe, and it's kind of taking the same like model.
Okay, right, interesting. Okay, so Mark, I would suggest that, well, on the China question, I don't think China is ever a good comparator to use in terms of development. Well, I've seen like a lot of people use China to say, you know, like, oh, look at China, we should be not like, we don't need democracy like China because look, they developed really super without democracy. But the conditions are very, very different in the sense, like if you look at the labor and the resources they have available and the vast pieces of land they have available, etc., it's not a good comparator to use. So, so yeah, I'd say, Mark, that I would not want to use China as a comparator here. As for the ethical contestations, I didn't quite understand what you're asking, but well, let me say what I got. I think that, yeah, I feel like people generally realize that AI, the experts and a lot of people realize that AI will have significant implications on, for example, labor, as you mentioned, labor. And I guess the ethical contestations, as you call them, come where there's a dispute, about how exactly one should respond, how exactly we should respond to that. For example, I've read that truck drivers in the US were at some point in some US states were fighting for regulation to sort of slow down driverless vehicles, because basically that was going to affect their work. Like if you have driverless trucks, then that's going to affect your work. So yeah, I guess at the level of what the interventions should be, I think there's agreement on, well, largely, some places there is no agreement, but largely speaking, there's agreement on the kind of areas where AI will have a significant impact, but or over what to do, that depends a lot on, I guess, sometimes self-interest, sometimes economic interest, sometimes altruism. So I guess it varies, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have a question in the chat now from Wangari, asking, do you think it is possible for global South countries to reach a point where they need not rely on AI developers from global North countries?
It's a good question. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. But I was reading the data, the last piece of data, the last pieces of data about engineers, how many engineers are available, high-level university courses that are available, etc. And of course, investment, the sheer economic investment into this, into developing AI. And the reality is we're pretty far off of that. We're pretty far off of specifically the United States and China, who are more or less the leaders. And then there's Europe and Canada, etc. So, I mean, to be quite frank, I think it's going to be very, very difficult, because of course also there's an advantage of creating the tool fast. There's the advantage you have of creating the tool fast, which I guess we might not have. And so network effects, I think that's what they call them, network effects. So yeah, let me just say, realistically speaking, maybe not in my lifetime.
Okay, thank you. All right. If there are no more questions, then I think we can. Oh, Aislinn, yes, please.
That wasn't actually a question. I just was adding on something that I forgot to mention before. It's very inconsequential.
Yes. That's the one I read, actually. So I think that's the part I had read, and I thought that maybe it's a general rule. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so I guess it is definitely possible. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question in the chat from Rakta, asking, what is the incentive for these developers of AI to regard to moral obligation or call to help develop capacity in global South countries or increase audibility of their system if they are not bound to do considering they have a market regardless. Sorry, I'm not sure if that made sense the way I read it, but yeah.
Yeah. I guess for me, that's why it's a moral obligation. I mean, you kind of just appeal to the ethics of the person or the ethics of the developers. I guess like ethics has, if we all agree on that something is wrong, the pressure that we can produce could also be useful to pressure someone who, even though they think it's not wrong, to decide not to do it because, of course, of the incidental consequence of looking bad to everyone else. So maybe that's the like the strategy one could also use, but by and large, it's an ethical appeal. So it's just an appeal to one's sense of right and wrong. More or less, yeah. If, of course, the EU could write a law, then that might like make it different. Yeah, but just otherwise, it's just an ethical appeal. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just had a question myself on this interdisciplinary culture you spoke of. Do you think that it would be more up to the individual, so say a software developer in this case, to educate themselves or to have this interdisciplinary component start thinking about the way that their work is affecting others and where it's being deployed? Or do you think it's more up to the organizations and governments and all of these institutions that really need to take the lead and get interdisciplinary individuals together? So social scientists, software developers, yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, I guess I would say the obvious answer is that both of them.
Yeah.
But then, like, if you ask me, I really like the fact that like your society is doing AI, like AI ethics talk, because I genuinely, well, I've had some conversations with like AI engineers, well, mostly in like in the US, and I always thought like it's pretty detached from, well, some of them, especially the ones from minority groups, were more like in touch, but by and large, they were pretty detached from like impact. And it was mostly a conversation of how much more accurate can we go, or how much more powerful can this get? And I feel like, so I'm basically saying both of them would work, and I'm not exactly sure which one I would prefer over the other. I suppose like if you're thinking about like regulation, from a regulation standpoint, it has to be that government brings them together. But like from what would help the future most standpoint, it's probably best these kinds of events that you're hosting are, in my opinion, the best, right? So yeah, that's I would say. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Cool. Okay. I think that might be it on the questions front. So we'll wrap up here, but thank you so much for joining us today, Cecil. Absolutely fantastic talk, and thank you for answering all of our questions.
Thank you for having me. And thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thanks so much. All right, take care and have a good evening or rest of your day.
Bye.
Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.